When people think of Adolf Hitler's brutality, the first image that comes to mind is the genocide of European Jews. But the Nazi worldview, a rigid, violent ideology rooted in racial hierarchy, targeted far more than Jewish communities. Under Hitler, anyone who did not fit the Aryan ideal was considered inferior, dangerous, or expendable. Non-white groups across the world, from Africa to Asia to the Americas, became victims of discrimination, humiliation, exploitation, and death because the Nazi regime believed they threatened racial purity and Aryan supremacy. The Nazi system was built on the belief that humanity could be sorted like a ladder. At the top, Northern Europeans. Below them, Southern and Eastern Europeans. Further down, non-white peoples. And at the very bottom, in Hitler's eyes, were groups he believed were less than human, a belief that justified cruelty without limit.
Africans in Germany. Humiliation, racism, and forced sterilization. Hitler viewed Africans and people of African descent as racial contaminants. He did not see them as merely different. He saw them as a threat to the biological future of Germany. His anger toward black people intensified after World War I, when France stationed African colonial troops in the Rhineland. Their presence produced children of mixed African and German heritage. Hitler called these children the Rhineland bastards, a term designed to strip them of humanity. One of the earliest Nazi racial policies targeted them directly. In secret, the regime established committees to identify mixed-race children and sterilize them. Many were taken from their homes and operated on without consent. They were told nothing. Their parents were told nothing. They were simply removed from the possibility of having families of their own. For black adults living in Germany, daily life became suffocating. They were banned from many professions, harassed in public, excluded from schools, monitored by police, and often used in racist propaganda films. Some were imprisoned, others were sent to concentration camps. Not in large numbers compared to other groups, but enough to demonstrate that no non-white life was safe.
Hitler's view of Asians: admiration, fear, and racist hierarchy. Hitler had a contradictory view of Asians, particularly the Japanese. He admired Japan's military discipline and saw the Japanese Empire as a potential ally. But admiration did not mean equality. Privately, Hitler believed that all Asians were racially inferior. He described them as culture bearers rather than culture creators, meaning he believed they could imitate Western civilization, but could never match it. His praise for Japan was strategic, a political move, not a sign of respect. Chinese people also faced Nazi racism. Before Hitler came to power, China and Germany had strong military ties. Chinese students studied in German universities, and Chinese officers trained with the German military. But after Hitler aligned Germany with Japan, Chinese citizens in Germany were suddenly treated as enemies. Hundreds of Chinese workers living in German cities were arrested, imprisoned, beaten, or forced into labor camps. Many were killed. In Hamburg alone, nearly 130 Chinese residents were tortured, interrogated, and starved. Their only crime was being Chinese during a war that reshaped alliances overnight.
Romani, Gypsy people. Genocide and extermination. Among non-white groups, the Romani people faced one of the most devastating fates under Hitler: genocide. Hitler believed the Romani were asocial and racially impure. They did not fit neatly into his racial theories, so he solved the problem with brutality. Romani families were rounded up, separated, deported, and murdered across Europe. By the end of the war, an estimated 500,000 Romani people were killed,
Men, women, children, entire families, many in the same extermination camps used in the Holocaust. This genocide is sometimes forgotten, but its scale was enormous. Half of Europe's Romani population was wiped out. Indigenous peoples and non-white citizens of allied nations. Hitler had contempt for indigenous peoples around the world. He believed they were incapable of self-rule, and he used their struggles as justification for colonial expansion. Native Americans, Aboriginal Australians, Pacific Islanders, and other indigenous groups were frequently mentioned in Nazi writings as examples of racial decline. Hitler also dismissed the populations of non-white allied nations. When discussing the U.S., he often mocked the country for being contaminated by what he considered inferior races. He believed African Americans, Indigenous Americans, and immigrant communities weakened the U.S., and that this racial mixture would lead to America's downfall. His worldview made no room for equality. Only conquest, domination, and hierarchy mattered.
Prisoners of war. Racism in the rules of survival. The Nazi regime treated prisoners of war, POWs, very differently depending on their race. Western European POWs were often treated according to international law. Soviet POWs, considered Slavic and subhuman, were starved, beaten, or executed. Over 2 million Soviet prisoners died in Nazi captivity. But non-white POWs, North Africans, black soldiers from French colonies, Indian troops serving under the British Empire, faced some of the worst conditions. Many were executed immediately after capture. Others were forced into brutal labor camps where death was routine. To Hitler, killing non-white soldiers did not violate his worldview, it confirmed it. Hitler's worldview, a global system of racial domination. If Hitler had won the war, his plans for non-white peoples were catastrophic. Documents recovered after the war show that Hitler wanted a global racial order dominated by Aryans at the top. Non-white populations would be enslaved, segregated, or exterminated to make room for a German-controlled world. His ideology was not just about Germany, it was about reshaping humanity itself.
The impact, trauma that echoes through history. The damage inflicted on non-white people under Hitler's rule did not end in 1945. Families were destroyed, cultures were scarred. Survivors carried psychological wounds that lasted generations. Entire communities, from Black Germans to Romani families to Chinese workers, saw their history shattered by a man whose hatred knew no borders. Hitler's war was not just a military conflict. It was a war against humanity, especially non-white humanity. Hitler's actions toward non-white people were driven by a belief in racial hierarchy that shaped every policy he created. From sterilization programs to labor camps, from executions to genocide, he imposed suffering on entire populations simply because of their race. Understanding this history is not just about recounting past horrors. It is about recognizing the dangers of any ideology that divides human beings based on the belief that some lives are worth less than others. If you'd like, I can expand this, simplify it for narration, or turn it into a script-style version for video.